I'd now like to invite to the stage Patricia Paul, who's going to give us some examples about some of the things we've been hearing about today.
Thank you. So I'd like to, can you hear me okay? All right. I'd like to suggest that we humans are famously shackled by a baseless belief that we're special. So whether it is the sun supposedly orbiting around the earth, or the idea that somehow we're not the products of evolution and animals like other animals, we're constantly blinded by the absurd idea that we're special. So I'm going to suggest today that this applies in the jobs realm, that humans are clinging to a belief that we as entities, as operating entities, are somehow so special that there's a certain high watermark of genius job beyond which automation cannot reach. Because again, doesn't the sun revolve around us? Aren't we special? Now, the problem with that is that time and time and time again, the data doesn't bear it out. So let me give you some granularity about this. I know a lot about lawyers. I'm a former lawyer. I work with lawyers every day in my job. That used to be one of the safe things. You know, mom and dad wanted me to go to law school kind of story is something you hear a lot about. But automation is moving rapidly up the food chain. And I think it was once seen, well, that's going to happen in document review, in the intense analysis of facts. That's the kind of thing machines are good at. But in fact, anyone here who has in fact done document review knows it's actually a very judgment-intensive process. So the fact that there is something called predictive coding, where a highly skilled, highly trained attorney teaches a program about the nuances of one individual case. Here's the subtleties of the emails to look for. Here are the things that are important. Once the attorney teaches the software that detail, they again go through an iterative teaching process. Machine, do the job. I'm correcting you. Do it again. I'm correcting you. 3 to 7 iterations later, you have something that is a better lawyer than a lawyer. And when people say to me, well, not my job, you know, those auto workers, they're thrown out of work, but not my job, I think some of it is because they believe they have like a Jetsons image, that like them, but like shiny silver is going to come do their job. And that's silly. But it doesn't look like that. Instead, what happens when high-skill occupations like lawyer or doctor, or as I'm about to speak to, tech executive, are automated, it looks much more like there's one high-skilled, top-of-their-profession person who is then copied. All right, I'm going to call this the Baxter model for obvious reasons, or you can call it the mimic model. That person explicitly teaches a learning program, or uses supports. Those supports, which make that one individual's job easier and make them much more powerful in their job in some sense, vacuums up the information. And so then where you used to have 50 lawyers, you have one and sophisticated software, or 50 lawyers, a paralegal, and software. And this sort of Baxter model holds true in a number of areas. And so attorneys will push back to me and say, well, brief writing, you can't automate that. But as journalists are beginning to learn with programs like Quill, you can. You absolutely can automate that. And I'm going to suggest to you that if you, like me, had the experience of drafting a 50-page insurance defense brief, you would realize that not only is consciousness not required to do that, it's an impediment to doing that. And the same is true for many other high-skilled jobs. So we're starting to see brief writing go up the food chain. For example, the general counsel of IBM had famously said, you know, we'll soon have digital associates like Ross or Blue Jay. And of course, this is always packaged as, don't worry, they won't take your job, they'll just support you. But how an associate that is perfect, never misses a case, works 24 hours a day instead of 18, does not put a human associate out of a job is unclear to me. And in fact, that's what we're starting to see in the market. And it's not just litigators, because let's face it, everyone hates us litigators, but it's the transactional and the deal guys as well. Increasingly, there's software already at many banks that can draft the NDAs, that can do the lending due diligence. Again, that is moving up the food chain as well. So what does this look like? What this looks like is what I sometimes call the rise of the homeless hedge fund lawyer. So you have these incredibly, stunningly educated individuals, the people who I'm privileged to work with every day in my day job, and they are seeing their wages fall. So, someone at the top of their game in the legal profession is accepting a job with a wage so much lower that they have to move their kids out of a house into a different living arrangement. It's not going up, it's going down. I'll give you an example. I called a patent attorney. It's a very small world at the top of the legal market, so I'm not going to give the specialty. But let's just say it was either chemical engineering, nanotech, or computer engineering, something that you would think would be very in demand. Called them, his voicemail at the office wasn't working. It was, even with my knowledge of all the disruption in the legal market, it was so inconceivable to me that this individual, who was an engineer before he was a lawyer, was laid off, that I called his cell and said, hey, your voicemail is working. You should tell your firm and get that fixed. Well, when I realized when he called back and said he had been laid off, I was like, this is it. Law is not what it is. If this individual, who I can't offhand think of what he could have done to be more nimble, current, forward-looking, on the cusp, and marketable, is laid off, then law is a different profession, and it's going very high up the food chain. Doctors, again, one of those safe things that your parents wanted you to go to medical school. Not as much anymore. Maybe you're familiar with the famous acronym ROAD, the road to happiness when you're choosing your medical specialties. That's radiology, ophthalmology, anesthesia, or dermatology. Supposedly the safest jobs is where road to happiness comes from. Well, I really don't even need to touch upon what's happening to radiologists. Ophthalmologists, in preparation for this talk, I spoke with a lot of people. I spoke, for example, with an ophthalmologist who described their practice that they've been associated with, succumbing to these pressures, closing. But she said, that's okay, because I used Rocket Lawyer, an automated lawyer that's really good, to come up with the documents really cheap to start my own practice. So I'm going to be okay, which sort of gets us into ecosystem effects, right, where these things snowball. And I said, okay, but don't you think your job could be automated? Talk to me. And she said, well, I can see how lawyers could be automated, right? That's what I got from everyone I interviewed. The other guy can be automated, not me. I'm special, right? So she said, mine can't be automated. And I said, show me around your office. Walk me through what you do. She was very generous with her time. She walked me through it, and she would go through each item. She's like, this really is already automated. And this thing here is too. But this you can't. And she came down to, I think it was really two things that she claimed would protect her entirely from automation. One was dilating a pupil and looking in the retina. Anyone who has seen the famous YouTube video of the Boston Robotics robot running full speed on the ice while a person kicks it hard and it maintains its footing is going to say, eye drops and looking in from different angles in a retina, not a problem, really. And then the other thing where she said she had an advantage over the machine was she said, well, a machine might measure change in vision, but it won't correlate that with the fact that maybe the patient has diabetes, and we should look into whether, the diabetes, is well controlled. But that's just a correlating databases problem. And in fact, again, I think the machine's going to be much better, because she even acknowledged her patients often neglect to mention they have diabetes and really almost never tell her if they're having trouble controlling it. So something that would mine automatically the patient's past health records would be much better. So, and you're seeing this again, just to run through all the letters in the ROAD acronym, anesthesia, right? Johnson & Johnson has Sedasys now, where one anesthesiologist can supervise 50 machines doing low-level anesthesia procedures. Again, the skill will be sort of vacuumed up. It'll be backstirred so that it gets built out more and more. So what happens is not the absurd Jetsons thing that people very rightly don't feel they have to worry about, of your robot clone walking up. It's that there used to be 500 of you, or 5,000, and now there's one. What happens to the other 499 or 999 as you sort of go up the algorithmic progression professionals? So what is the soothing bedtime story we're all being told as the lights are turned out on what used to be, the solidly middle-class professions? The soothing bedtime story we're being told is we'll all do tech. We'll all be entrepreneurs. We'll all do tech. We'll all code WhatsApp. The problem with that is when I interviewed people in preparation for this panel, right, again, every single person said, not me, not my job. But there was one huge exception. That huge exception was extremely accomplished tech visionaries and entrepreneurs. And when I would ask them, like when I would ask an extremely successful tech individual who manages a global team, I said, for my talk, can you tell me a little bit about what tech jobs you think might be vulnerable to automation? All. I was like, wait, what? He said, all. I was like, no, break it out. All. So I asked him to talk me through that, and he said, when you're in an environment where you're talking about cloud robotics and machine learning, the idea that you have to be human to be creative is just not true anymore. It's much more of an evolutionary process that we're facing now. So his point was, yes, there'll be a couple of people there, but it'll be much more like the lights out factories where a human goes in occasionally but is really not needed every day. And he said, and by the way, that takes care of the HR people and the cafeteria workers too. So I think the 47% structural unemployment number that's thrown around a lot is really probably very low. And I think I'm going to say a lot of very educated and good-hearted individuals, but highly skilled and educated individuals sort of stood by as the physical occupations were automated and there was a lot of disruption because we thought we were special. Well, guess what? Compared to a massively powerful machine learning system, the difference in complexity of skill between welding and surgery is really almost imperceptible. So as we continue this model of one individual doing the work of 500 with support and having the skills vacuumed out, call it the mimic economy, but there's very little it's not susceptible to. So again, the story we're told of, well, the Industrial Revolution created jobs, there'll always be another wave of jobs. There is no such law of physics. Let's break it down into buckets about what humans could do. There's physical work. Well, that was automated. Then there's physical work that requires a lot of flexibility or adaptability. That's being automated now, right? We're seeing the Baxters of the world and all of the related to autos, all of those systems that can do that kind of, the robotic surgeons. So that leaves us with intellectual work. What I'm seeing in terms of highly skilled jobs out there, finance we barely need to talk about in terms of a high skilled job being automated. Law, medicine, you could go through the list. There's nothing so special about intellectual work that it can't be automated. So then people say, oh, well, there'll be some other bucket of jobs. Well, if it's not physical or mental labor, I'm not really sure what kind of labor that is, what's left. So you could say, well, creative. First of all, I'm no economist, but I'm a little skeptical that you can create an entire economy, a working, functioning economy that feeds everybody based on people being creative. Just by way of example, if I had to make a living by being artistically creative, I would starve in a week. So this is not a great option for everyone. And I just don't think you have a functioning economy there. So what bucket of work is left? Emotional. Let's talk about emotional or relationship work. And you sometimes, in a bit of an inchoate way, hear people saying, well, in a mechanized economy, we'll move towards emotional work. Well, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but the fact is that if you think robots or mechanized systems are better at physical work than we are, wait till you see what they can do on the emotional work. I would like to point out that professions where your ability to put food on the table depends entirely on your charm and pleasant social skills, like really being like a wait person, a salesperson. People in those jobs are routinely surly. I'm sure you've come across this, right? We humans are so buggy and glitchy and inefficient that our social skills, really, if we're like better than 50-50, that's really exceptional. So a machine can very easily be engineered to do better. The architects of many tech products that we all use today are very explicit about that. They'll say, for a human interaction to feel enjoyable, you have to have maybe 4 or 5 positive to 1 negative interaction. They're like, we can beat that 100 to 1. We can beat that 1,000 to 1. So in very much the way that voice recognition was finally created successfully just out of massive data sets, right, that turned out to be the right way to do it, the new generation of administrative assistants, digital administrative assistants, are probably going to provide some of that data set for engineering social interaction. So let's talk about sort of another, what does automation look like when you add the social and emotional piece? If I prefer the convenience of an ATM to a human bank teller, how about when the ATM has the personality of Ellen DeGeneres or Stephen Colbert? That's a Google patent, by the way, to download personality like this. So what I'm calling for is a social movement. None of our good policy changes will happen if we don't have a politically powerful social movement to back it up. So if you want to see where is work, there is work if you have the backbone for it, building a social movement around these issues.
Wow. I think it's really interesting that the figure you said, that the famous Oxford study, the 47% of these jobs are susceptible, I think that's barely scratching the surface. And that's why I wanted Patricia to sort of tales from the trenches. The trenches are not other people's trenches. These are our trenches. These are our careers, our lives. It's going to happen very rapidly. There's a cognitive bias. Not only do we think we're special, but humans have cognitive biases. And one of the most famous ones is the fact that humans are not set up to pay attention to exponential change. So one of the examples that I give is, you know those water hyacinths that grow overnight very quickly on the surface of lakes? So you can have a 10,000 square mile lake in Africa, and someone introduces this foreign plant on the surface of the lake, and it's got one plant, and the next day it has two. It doubles overnight. And in that 10,000 square mile lake, you can have 5,000 square miles covered before people begin to pay attention. And when they do pay attention, they go to the center of the lake and see half of the lake uncovered and say, wow, we've got a lot of time. We are not evolutionary set up to understand and deal very much with exponential change. So I think we are about to see that when it comes to technological unemployment.